What is going on, YouTube? It is your boy, Faithful to God, and I am up early this morning with Abu. We're going to be discussing various topics. Uh, so this live stream is called Early Morning Discussions, and we're going to be talking about a variety of different things. Without further ado, I have Abu. Abu, say what's up to the audience.
Good afternoon or good morning to those who are in the United States. It's good to do this. We might do this. We're not sure how often we're going to do this, but we might do this. It might be helpful to do this every now and then. Have a sort of freestyle conversation on a variety of topics. Current trends and whatever subjects we're interested in. Not only
Indeed.
the Israelites, it could be other subjects, Islam, atheism, so on.
Indeed. So, what I want to do is I want to start off by talking about your two videos that are on this channel. So the two videos are on the topic of the Georgia Pews, one of your favorite topics, one of my favorite topics. I don't know if it's the favorite topic of the people we've been interacting with since
they largely find it quite painful, I think.
Yes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show one of the first videos. So on my channel, of course, on your channel, it has a different name, but on my channel, it is entitled We Woke Now Expose Part 2. I'm going to show that on the screen right now so the audience can see what we're looking at. So here is the link. And so I'm going to kind of let this play just in the background just a little bit. So this was the video that was uploaded a few days back. You go over various topics, obviously, right? In fact, what we're looking at on our screen right now is
a Facebook post by William Brown. And so what the video was basically a response to a recent video by our good friend, Dr. Kelly Richardson, which I believe was titled The Spirit of Benita Bottrell. He had put it out, I don't know, a week or two ago. I don't remember the precise date, but yeah, so it was a response to that. And so I was responding to a number of points in his video, not all of his video, because some of his video is, if I can say so, with all due respect to our friend, some of it was even too infantile for us. But we dealt with the stuff that related to language mostly. It was mostly his language-related claims.
Right. Well, since I actually have the video up on the screen right now, what were some of the things that you found a bit telling? In terms of argumentation, things that you thought that were just not good arguments. I'm sure most of what you showed in the video you would consider not good arguments, but I guess the more telling points of the sort of arguments that he was presenting.
So there's two things that stand out for me, and this is on the more general front rather than specific arguments. We'll get into specific arguments in a bit, but in general, two things stand out for me. First, number one, the thing that stands out for me is I feel like our good friend Dr. Kelly is he seems to have an aversion to getting into methodology, to trying to discuss methodology and have a sound methodology. And I've sensed this from the very beginning. As you know, your audience might not know, we started to get into this vis-a-vis Dr. Kelly. We started to get into this with Dr. Kelly in October of 2019. And almost immediately it became apparent that, he's not really interested in the methodological questions of this subject. Others have pointed out that it seems the Pews are only interesting to him insofar as he can use it to advance his position on Israelites, and that's why he insists on conflating
ethnicity claims.
Yes, exactly. Claims. Which is funny because they accuse us of conflating it, with of us of having some sort of agenda against their ethnicity claims. When, I've at least said, let's treat those as two separate subjects. They insist on conflating them. But so he's never seemed to have an interest in methodology. And so what's happened is that as now he's sort of been forced to get into the methodological questions. Slowly he's scratched the surface. But I've always found that interesting because, here it is. He's a man who identifies as a doctor. And I don't have a doctorate. Unlike our good friend, I don't have a doctorate. But I've gone through enough of grad school and, the academic process to know that, academia will build within you a sense of methodology. It's not just about what you're studying. It's not just memorizing subjects. Once you get into, certainly through the undergraduate, certainly within the graduate realm, and even through certain parts of the undergraduate experience, you begin to develop a proper sense of methodology, at least some sort of a concern for that. And he seems to lack that, which is interesting because but whatever, we'll get into that. It is interesting to think of a person who's gone all the way to a doctorate and they haven't developed that sort of sense of the need for a proper approach to methodology. Whatever the case,
Right.
that aside, the other thing that stood out for me was the double standards. That's a big glaring point for me with this recent video, and it's so it wasn't just his video, but then also he did a joint video or two joint videos with Benayah Israel, and shout out to Benayah. I like Benayah. He seems like an authentic gentleman, but the approach that they took was inconsistent with the approach that they've taken in the past. And, I find that interesting because Dr. Kelly has accused us of moving the goalposts. And
Right.
yet they did that in a rather glaring way. And by they, I mean more specifically Kelly and Brown. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Can I just use an example from this video? So for what we were showing, let me actually go back. Let me
that was a good example on the screen if you could. Yeah.
Right, so the suggested letters. Here's something interesting, right? So to kind of give a little bit of a background. So the whole idea of these suggested letters, this was all from the video that they put out in November of 2020, where they presented what they deemed to be at the time knockdown evidence of the Pews somehow having Hebrew based on their complete misrepresentation of one David Bunis, a scholar of Solitero.
Yeah, so what had happened back then was they had proposed a reading for one of the pews, and it was a reading that really didn't make a lot of sense. There's a number of glaring problems with it. They proposed a reading that went from left to right. A lot of the terms that they suggested, the sentence they suggested honestly seemed like gibberish. In many respects, it was based on a misunderstanding of the translation software they were using. But then, after putting that out, then they declared to quite a bit of excitement that a very serious scholar had backed their position. He agreed with their translation, and that was significant. But
which then turned out to be false, right? We found out that the relevant scholar didn't actually agree with their position, and they had badly misrepresented him. In fact, he was very clear.
Never owned up to that.
But yeah, they never owned up to that. How about this? The fact that when he emailed Will Brown, he actually ended up emailing you guys as well, right? And he was very clear with Will Brown that he had been badly misrepresented.
Yep. There was a deliberate bit of misrepresentation, and this is also going to be relevant in this discussion. There were things that Bunis told them that they kept hidden. Like, for example, Bunis flat out told them that he doesn't think that Solitero appears on that pew. And they went ahead and said, afterwards, when that email was private, when that was, nobody else knew about that email, they went ahead and said, we have the official stamp of approval of the scholar David Bunis that it's Solitero on the pew. And so, it was only when we got our hands on more information through correspondences with Bunis, and also other people had corresponded with Bunis and shared it with us, that we brought that out, and we sort of forced their hand. And that's sort of an issue for me that, when it comes to correspondences with scholars, we basically show everything, and they still to this day keep quite a bit secret. Like the stuff that's come out is only because
the secret scholars and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and also just even in the case of like Bunis, the stuff that they didn't share. Like apparently Bunis originally told them that it looked more like Arabic than Hebrew to him. Now, just to be clear, Bunis never endorsed the idea that Arabic's on there. He later said that he took it to a colleague who's quite well versed in Arabic, and he didn't think there was anything on there. But the point is, Bunis initially told them it looked more like Arabic than Solitero. They never shared that. He told them he doesn't think it's Solitero. They didn't share that. We had to bring that out. So there's a lack of transparency on their side, and it begs a lot of questions. But getting back to the double standards, what we have on our screen is what they sent Bunis. When they wanted to get a scholar to back their reading of one of the pews, they sent a highlighted picture. They highlighted the pew, and then they also shared, suggested readings, specific letter combinations, and even translations of it. Like to take a grasp. It's hard to see on the screen, but to basically take a grasp of God with a bass voice. And
if I could just interject for a moment, just very quickly. So the ironic part was that in this video, you're making a response to Kelly Richardson's, I guess, allegations against you, where he made a response to the video that I believe which is on my channel. It's entitled or labeled Cambridge Scholar, top Cambridge Scholar says Hebrew not on Georgia Pew, right? So he responded to that portion of the video, right? Which was a part of a larger video, which, if I'm not mistaken, he tried to get flagged down. I wonder why.
They've tried to flag every video.
Right.
Although
But
allegedly it's not him; it's the U.S. government.
yes, yeah, supposedly, yeah. So here's the interesting thing. In that relevant video, you showed three emails, right? One from Samar Ali, one from Jeffrey Kahn, and then the last one was from.
Mohsen Gudarzi.
Now, the first two scholars seem to go with the view that they believe that the relevant markings resembled the phrase. You can say for the audience.
Ilahinas, Ilahinas. It's a phrase from
Ilahinas,
the
right?
Quran.
The
So
God
just
of
to give a bit
humanity.
of background, they were claiming they had scholars on their side, and then it turned out that they misrepresented one scholar and completely fabricated another. They've never owned up to that either. That they brought out this fake persona called Richard Katz. But in the midst of that, like I didn't really want to get into the scholars. I felt we should just focus on the pew. They started taunting their followers, started taunting us and saying, "Well, why don't you reach out to some scholars?" So I did reach out to some scholars and two with different levels of certitude or certainty proposed a specific reading for one of the pews, an Arabic reading, as you mentioned. Jafri Khan, rather,
Well, before you go on, because they may try to grab a hold of that and try to misrepresent what you just said.
Okay.
So what you did was you employed the same technique that they employed. In essence, what you wanted to do is to show, well, two things I believe you wanted to show.
Mm-hmm.
One, if one takes that technique and shows, I guess, a pew with highlightings on it, like they did, like you're seeing on your screen right now. Matter of fact, let me just do that very quickly. Let me go to the part of the video where they have the highlightings on the relevant pews. Right there we go, right here. This part right here in the red. This was their photo that they sent the scholar. Like notice here that they have one without it and one with it, right?
Exactly. And then on the right is them actually suggesting a reading. So I didn't suggest
a reading. Now
so
you didn't suggest a reading. So let's be on record about this. Let me go ahead and just point this out to the audience. Abu made his emails after the fact. They did this on November, late November of 2020, right?
Yeah, precisely.
And you sent out your emails to scholars in December.
Yep.
Right, of 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
So roughly close to about a month later. Yes. Roughly around a month later. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing. Interesting point. When you sent out the relevant email, you pointed out the claim, because there's a claim out there that the relevant, this is coming from the church itself, right? That they believe that the church believes that it could be West African cursive script at this point, correct?
Yeah, or West African Arabic is what they.
Or Arabic script, that's what it is. Cursive Arabic, right? Right. I've heard cursive Arabic. I've heard just West African Arabic script just in and of itself. But the point is that they believe Arabic is on the pew, right? That's the current church's position, First African Baptist Church. And what you did was you presented the image of the relevant pew without the markings, like this, similar to what we have right here, right? Without the markings, and then one with the markings, correct?
That's correct.
And when you did that, obviously, it was to essentially use the same methodology that they attempted to employ, with the exception that you didn't present a reading like they did here on the right-hand side.
Right. And so the reason this is relevant now is because in Kelly Richardson's recent video, he conveniently forgets or neglects to mention what they sent out in November. And instead, he attacks what I sent out and said that I was, quote, leading the witness, that it shows that I'm dishonest, that I don't want an honest assessment of the pew by virtue of the fact that I sent a highlighted image and so on. This was like part of his attack. And I think this is the glaring issue with their moving of the goalposts. They're changing standards from moment to moment.
So in other words, all you did was employ the same not tactic, I don't want to call it. You employed the same methodology they employed. Right? So it was the same methodology they employed. So as you can see on your screen, this was their email that they sent to David Boonis, where they have one pew without the marking and then the other pew with the marking, right? Yep. The only difference was, instead of suggesting a reading, what you did is at the bottom, you put particular notes relevant to what people are saying about the pew, the specific pew that you sent, right? That the pew looks like it could resemble Arabic characters. Not only that, the history of there being certain, if I'm not mistaken, if you could go a little bit into the notes, because there seemed to be quite a bit of a big deal made over the notes at the bottom.
Yeah. So in my emails to the scholars, I had 2 footnotes, and it's funny. Dr. Kelly, a man with a doctorate, he found the idea of footnotes preposterous. He even laughed in his video. He sneeringly says he really had footnotes in his emails. But anyway, my two footnotes, one was to the website of the church's official website, in which they currently claim it's Arabic on the pews. And then the second one was to another example of a text of the Quran, more specifically, one of the shorter suwad, one of the shorter chapters of the Quran, written from memory by a slave in the Americas. So we have like an example of that. It's at the University of Pennsylvania, where a slave wrote out the 112th chapter of the Quran from memory. So I had also shared that, and they felt that was outrageous, that I was also leading the witness, so to speak.
Yeah, but just utter ridiculousness, right? So showing that there is evidence of slaves in Georgia who were able to write in Arabic, right? The fact that that is a absolute 100% fact, right?
Yeah, that's a fact. That wasn't precisely what I sent to them, but yeah, that's a fact as well. We know that at the time the church was being built, there were slaves in the state of Georgia who could write in Arabic. There's a very famous, Bilali Muhammad is the most famous example of that. He was on.
So wouldn't it be far-fetched that you could have some slaves, some, not all, some,
right?
Who, even if it's a small number, who still wrote in Arabic, and this is still greater than the amount of slaves who purportedly wrote in quote unquote Hebrew, right?
Yeah,
so-called wrote in Hebrew.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that also came up in our videos, because they, what's his name, Benayah had pointed out that and I agree with this in a vacuum, the amount of evidence that we have of slaves in the United States, in the Americas in general, or specifically Georgia, however you want to limit it, but whatever the case, the amount of evidence we have of slaves literate in Arabic is actually scarce. It's scant. There's not a lot of examples of that. And I agree 100% with Benayah, but I felt that point, while it's a good point in a vacuum, in the context of the case for Arabic vis-a-vis the case for Hebrew or Ge'ez, I felt that it was somewhat misleading and unfair, because while it is true that our evidence of Arabic literacy among slaves in the Americas is very small, it's still significantly larger than our evidence of Hebrew or Ge'ez literacy among slaves in the Americas.
Right. Now, while you personally aren't making this topic about ethnicity, I feel that their arguments are driven by their ethnicity claims.
And they continue to conflate them. They continue to conflate them. And that's one of the great ironies of this, because another controversy that came up previously was, so a number of people reached out to Bunis when they first claimed that Bunis, this scholar, a very serious scholar, David Bunis, had agreed with their reading of one of the Pews, right? And they excited a lot of people with that. A few people noticed that while they attributed a lot of claims to Bunis, they never showed emails in which Bunis actually made those claims. So independently of one another, different people reached out to Bunis. And one of the people who did so was a gentleman that I at the time was not familiar with. I was not familiar with this gentleman, but he was the one person who reached out and mentioned Hebrew Israelites in his email, something to the effect of, Hebrew Israelites are, using your emails to say such and such, and then, make this case for their ethnic claims. And they seized on that. Kelly Richardson, when they got embarrassed by being, when it was shown that they had misrepresented Bunis, they tried to change the narrative by manufacturing essentially as a manufactured controversy, if you can forgive me for being redundant, but they manufactured a controversy in which they tried to change the narrative to, the UA have harassed this professor by, sending him emails about
which
Hebrew
is completely
Israelites.
False.
Yeah, first off, none of us knew this gentleman, the gentleman who did that. And that's number one. Number two, or second of all, his email made sense because they were conflating the Israelite question with the language question. And the irony is, both myself and Vocab, we had told them to separate out the questions, that the questions about the Pews are about language. They're not about lineage. There was a show on Berean TV where Kelly Richardson and Vocab were on at the same time, and Vocab even held up a handwritten sign while Kelly was speaking that said, it's about language, it's not about lineage. And then we had a video making this point, like how it's the question about the Pews is irrelevant to your lineage and all that. But they wouldn't heed that. They insisted on constantly conflating the issue. And because they did so, one guy was influenced by that. It turns out he's a teacher, I believe, down south, I think in Virginia. And his students were making those connections because, they insisted on it, and their videos had influenced this man's students. So that's why he mentioned it. So the only reason why I go down this rabbit trail here, this segue, is because they're more culpable in that one email that they feigned outrage at. They're culpable in that email mentioning Israelites because they couldn't just keep it on the pews. They had to continuously insist on conflating it with the Israelite question. And the thing is, they haven't, how can I put this? They don't seem to have, you know, they haven't sort of come to understand that yet, that why that's an issue, and they're continuing to conflate the two questions now. You know, they get outraged when people get influenced by that, but nonetheless, they continue to do it.
Yeah, if I could just interject very quickly. You know, one of the things that I find intriguing about this whole back and forth is, well, number one, let's just, from the very beginning, you were very respectful towards Kelly Richardson in the very beginning.
Yes.
And yet he feigned outrage and anger towards the idea that you had supposedly insulted his family when you had done no such thing. Yeah, supposedly defamed him. So if I could just explain to the audience, let me just explain to the audience. Abu made 2 videos in the very beginning. Both of the videos were very respectful. I mean, it's typical Abu gentleman stuff. You know, he, you know, even the titles of the videos, when I reshared them on my channel, Abu strictly made me keep the titles respectful. You know, nothing like Kelly Richardson debunked or Kelly Richardson exposed like you might see in some of the videos now. And even then, Kelly Richardson still feigned outrage at the idea that he was addressing his, i.e. his Kelly Richardson's claims for the pews while never actually demonstrating anything, never demonstrating a methodology, never demonstrating how he sees language on the pews. He simply asserted that he saw particular characters that he thought resembled certain letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And he even, after the fact, right? Even when you made the 2 videos, when he claimed that he was going to sue you.
That was one of the first things he did. He threatened litigation, said he could sue us for defamation. And this has continued on. He's continuously done this. He's continuously made these legal bluffs, threatening to sue us, threatening to bring the full weight of the law down.
But to not go on a rabbit trail, what I want to do is I want to highlight, though, when he did that, he continued to make appeals to, then he started making appeals to Ge'ez, right, which he mispronounced Ga'az.
Yeah.
And
Lashawn Qadash application.
Lashawn Qadash, which we could talk about that a little bit later. But so the interesting thing is, when he starts doing that, that's when things started to snowball, where it started to become, you know, more, I guess, I don't want to say disrespectful, maybe more aggressive over time.
Yeah.
Where like then when he starts making his response videos the following year in 2020, when he started doing the what was it, no dialogue or something like that, part 1 and part,
the UA exposed and all this, and where he accused us of witchcraft and you know, it's funny within that, when he did his UA exposed video, where again he never proposed a reading, he never addressed any of our arguments. One of the things that he did is he said, oh, they never discussed the fact that the windows, the stained glass windows in this church's sanctuary go from right to left, just like in the Hebrew language. So we made a video addressing that, and then afterwards he was like, "Oh, they're mocking the sanctuary," you know, like almost like as if to say, "Why did they even go there?" So do you notice a pattern? Into it, yeah.
Do you notice a pattern that he continually moves the goalposts? He proposes an argument. Well, hear me out. He proposes an argument. Then, when the argument is refuted or it's shown to be faulty, he then moves the goalpost and acts as if like he's not the one who presented the argument, right?
Exactly.
So for example, your videos on the pews were simply responses to his initial video on the pews.
Exactly.
It wasn't like you just randomly found this guy named Kelly Richardson and were like, oh, I'm gonna make this guy's life difficult today. You know, of course it was like he made a video where he was promoting, I guess, some sort of like conspiracy, like, oh, they're trying to hide the truth, that kind of stuff, while never actually demonstrating language on the pew, right?
Right.
And no language was demonstrated on the pew until Benayah Israel.
Well, Benayah didn't. No attempt was made. No attempt was made. No, yeah, that's right. No attempt was made to demonstrate language. Language was asserted via characters, via letters. Yeah, almost like you had to take it on faith.
But no discernible phrases, nothing was proposed. And in fact, the only person who actually proposed a reading on the pews of anything, just to give a kind of a methodology of how one would go about doing it, was you.
Exactly.
In your thought experiment. And for the record,
a year. That went on for a year. I was the only
one. Hold on. To be on record, you don't believe, even now, you don't actually believe Arabic is on the pews.
Right. Exactly.
So, but what you have proposed is, if any language were on the pews, if we're just being honest here,
Mm-hmm.
the one language that probably has the strongest case is Arabic.
Yes, exactly.
Given all the available evidence, given the even if the slaves wrote in Arabic in a very small demographic, that is still significantly larger than the amount of slaves that wrote in Hebrew.
Well, I only brought that up because Benayah tried to go down that road and say, you know, oh, there were very few slaves who knew Arabic. Like, true, but if that's going to be your argument, I mean, then it gets even worse for Hebrew and Ge'ez. But yeah, so that's a sort of recent development.
But
yeah,
given all the available evidence, I want to be on record about this. Even if you're not proposing that Arabic is actually on the pews, but you can say the evidence for Arabic is significantly stronger than any purported evidence for Hebrew, evidence for Ge'ez, any evidence for any other language. The only language thus far that has shown to be, I guess, in terms of all the available evidence, when I mean all regarding what slaves wrote in, what sort of languages, the strongest case thus far has been for Arabic.
Yeah, and now, so I'll put it this way: for the first year from October of 2019 on into November of 2020, I was the only one to even suggest now it was a hypothetical case. It was a suggestion merely as a thought experiment, but I was the only one to suggest even a coherent phrase for Arabic. No one had done that for Hebrew, right? And since then, they still haven't been able to suggest something that's coherent and well attested. Like, for example, Kelly Richardson has suggested a completely ahistorical string of characters where Israel is spelled with a Zion and 5 yods. You know, yod, Zion, Dresh, and then 3 yods. Lamed.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah.
Let me actually go to it. So let me actually show the one that he proposed. Yeah, that.
Yeah, so that yellow text, he claims that's Yisrael. Oh, it's missing the lamed. So a second later, the lamed appears on the screen. Okay. But he's suggesting just hit play, hit play and pause, and the lamed should come up in a second. Okay, pause.
There we go.
Yeah, good. Yep. Yeah, it only goes up for a second. But whatever the case, he claims that that's Yisrael, in which Israel is spelled Yod Yod. So it opens with 2 yods. Zion, Reish, Yod Yod Yod, Lamed. This is a completely ahistorical string of characters. You won't find this anywhere, you know. But he claims that that's what they wrote on the pews. For the same pew, I suggested not only a coherent phrase, but also a well-attested Arabic phrase.
And then these things that he was mentioning in the video.
And we can get to that in a bit. Yeah, so there's the string of characters that he suggested at the bottom. I mean, this is practically gibberish. This is essentially gibberish. And on top of that, he hasn't. I mean, now again, I didn't want to get into this whole let's see if we can get a scholar to agree with it game, because I do think it's a game ultimately. But he hasn't found any scholar who agrees that the pew looks like it says Yisrael with 5 yods. But meanwhile, there have been professors. There's been 3 different professors who, independently of one another, looked at that same pew and said, with different degrees of certitude and hesitancy, that it looks like it says the Quranic Arabic phrase Ilahin Nas.
And let me actually pull that up very quickly. So I have it on my screen now. I'm gonna go ahead and pull it up. I'm gonna go to the part of the video that shows the emails, because I don't want anybody to say, "Oh, he hasn't actually shown evidence of this." Here we go.
Well, it comes up in previous videos, but yeah.
But let's just show it for the audience out there, those who may not be familiar with the particular argument. So this was what you proposed, right? The email that you sent, and then this is the notes at the bottom that they, specifically Kelly Richardson mocked. All right, so this is Samar Ali, and so he basically says, "Thanks for reaching out, and this is super interesting. It looks like Arabic in the West African script." Which is interesting, right? Because I don't think, did you propose West African?
No, I did not.
Actually, let me just make sure. Let's just be fair. Let's just be transparent here.
Yeah, let's see what I wrote.
It says the church's website. It says it's a classical West African Arabic script. So let's just being fair. Be fair.
Yep.
But even there, the church is proposing this. This isn't you proposing this. This is the church.
And I myself mentioned Hebrew because that's part of the discussion. I mentioned Hebrew in the discussion.
It says the person who suggested Quranic Arabic said slaves in the Americas were able to write portions of the Quran from memory is not in precedent. And so then you go, in light of this piece from Haiti, currently at the University of Pennsylvania, and then you showed the relevant link. And you didn't, I don't think you showed the Balali.
No, I did not, which is even closer. I mean, that's in Georgia. Yeah, exactly.
That's in Georgia, right. So even there, you didn't show anything from Georgia, but
you know what's interesting? Real quick, while he didn't suggest a reading for the pew, Suhaib Webb, he was one of the professors that I reached out to. Suhaib Webb said, I'm not sure I see anything on that pew, but I would suggest reaching out to scholars who are familiar with Sapelo Island, which is where Bilali Muhammad was from. Because there have been scholars who have looked into the Muslim history of Sapelo Island.
Right. So let's look at this. So Samar Ali says, it looks like Arabic in the West African script, and it could very well be a 3-word snippet of chapter 114 of the Quran, which nearly every Muslim would know and use for ritual prayer.
And this is
I can't be certain
that they use it as a prayer.
Yeah. So I can't be certain without more context, but it looks like Al-Nas, where basically the God of humanity from the middle of that chapter. And so he gives the relevant reading from the Quranic.
So he gave 3 words there, Al-Nas, Ilahi Al-Nas, which means humanity, the God of humanity. Basically he's suggesting the end of verse 2 of the last chapter of the Quran, and then all of verse 3 of the last chapter of the Quran.
So let's do something right here. So here you have Jeffrey Kahn. Now, what's significant about Jeffrey Kahn? Tell the audience out there.
So the biggest thing about Jeffrey Kahn is, of all the scholars we've reached out to, Jeffrey Kahn he's a Semiticist that covers multiple languages. He holds the royal chair, the Hebrew chair, at Cambridge University in England. So he's the
Regius Professor.
He's the Regius Professor of Hebrew at Cambridge, and then on top of that, he's a professor of Arabic. He does a lot of work on Arabic in general. He teaches Arabic at Cambridge, and for decades now, he's been working on, for example, Judeo-Arabic documents. So separate from these videos, we recently discussed some of his work on the Cairo Geniza, and which has a number of Judeo-Arabic documents, which are basically Arabic documents written in the Hebrew script. So he's very familiar with Hebrew and with Arabic, and with the overlap of the two.
Right. And so because he has study in both Hebrew and Arabic, professional study, and he can give a honest assessment of what he's looking at, right?
Yeah, and he's well versed enough to see both. Yeah,
he's well versed to see both. Now, Samar Ali was hesitant.
I'm sorry, can I interject with one thing? Benayah Israel, he has a video where he's in Savannah. I think he's in Franklin Square, and he's in Savannah, and he raises this objection. He says, what's been going on is you'll have guys who will look at the pews and they only know Arabic, but they're not familiar with Hebrew, and then you'll have guys who look at the pews and they're familiar with Hebrew, but they're not familiar with Arabic. We need to have both Arabic and Hebrew scholars look at it. He said something to that effect, and what he left out, I'm guessing he's aware of this. Maybe he's not aware of this, but we did have at least one scholar who's very much steeped in both Hebrew and Arabic. Look at one of the pews, and that's Jeffrey Kahn.
And can it be the case that out of all the scholars that have been consulted, he has been the top scholar out of everybody in terms of positional rank, in terms of being able to look at Hebrew and Arabic? Thus far, he has been the most accredited scholar, at the very least, the most accredited.
Yeah, I think we should be careful how we word that. I think Bunis is very much a good source in terms of the Solitreo, and Efrem Isaac is also relevant insofar that he apparently has a command of not only Ge'ez and other Ethiopian languages like Amharic, but also of Hebrew and Arabic. But
relevant to the topic that we're discussing, can we say that given his
he's right
Jeffrey,
up there. Yeah, he's up there. He's way up there. Yeah,
he's way up there.
This is a professor at Cambridge. It's a very serious professor, and he's very much steeped in the two relevant languages here.
Right. So look at this. Look what he says. He says, "Thank you very much for your message and for the photos of the pews in Savannah. The writing is Arabic and contains verses 2 and 3 from the final chapter surah of the Quran. The text is visible in the photo. The text visible in the photo reads in Arabic, sovereign of mankind, the God of mankind. When do you think this was written on the pews? Was it written by slaves who built it? Best wishes, Jeffrey," right? Mm-hmm. So there was a follow-up email because I think...
I wrote to him and gave him... See, the funny thing is they say I manipulated these professors into moving towards Arabic. I wrote back and again asked him about Hebrew, so
This was your response. So you say, Greetings, Professor Kahn. Thank you very much for your reply. Regarding your question, I do not know for certain when the markings were made. The only thing I have is the church's oral tradition, which posits that the same slaves who made those pews were the ones who made those markings. Ergo, assuming that is correct, the markings would date to the 1850s. I really appreciate you sharing your conclusion regarding what appears in those markings. Forgive me if this question is somewhat redundant, but just to be clear, would you say it is definitely Arabic and not Hebrew? The context of my question is the alternate suggestions which have floated around, some positing that the markings could be Arabic and others positing that the markings could be Hebrew.
Now this was this is relevant because they claim that we stack the deck in favor of Arabic, but here it is. We already got this scholar saying it's Arabic, and I asked him basically to circle back to the question of Hebrew.
Yes. So his response was, the writing is clearly Arabic, and it is clearly from the Quran, the final surah, Surah Al-Nas. It is certainly not Hebrew.
Yeah.
Do you know where the slaves came from originally? Best wishes, Jeffrey. So here you have a scholar, a top scholar, the top scholar at Cambridge University. You know, the one Cambridge University that a lot of these guys like to make appeals to when it comes to other topics, which they also tend to misrepresent, ironically enough. But yet here, the top Cambridge Hebrew, the chair of Cambridge University, the Hebrew chair.
Royal chair. This Hebrew chair position was established by the King of England like 400 years ago. So it's a very prestigious position. Yeah, he's the Hebrew chair.
So the top professor at Cambridge University in Hebrew is saying that it is clearly Arabic and not Hebrew. And given that he is the top Hebrew professor, he would have proficiency in the language, understanding the language. And if he saw anything that was Hebrew, he would automatically be able to pick up on it. And yet here he is saying, no, it's not Hebrew, it's Arabic. Now, I think that's significant. Now, even there, let's just be a little transparent here, because the third scholar disagreed, right?
Yeah, Mohsen Gudarsi.
Let me actually go there real quick. So he says, thank you for your email. I have looked at the images carefully, and I don't believe they contain Arabic writing. So here you have a scholar saying he doesn't think Arabic is on the pews. On the other hand,
out. The thing here's a central point. We showed this email right from the jump. See, the thing is, they talk about how we wrote to many scholars, and say, well, why don't you show what all those scholars said? Because I bet, you know, if there's a scholar that disagrees with you, why don't you show that? Or for example, when Bunis tells you it's not solitreo, why did you hide that? Like, why do you just show fragments of emails? Show everything like we do, you know?
And yet here you have the relevant scholars saying, now, it's not impossible for the markings to represent a highly cursive, idiosyncratic, and or local form of Arabic script. Someone with expertise in West African Islam could be a better judge of this. So even here, the scholar is saying, I don't think I see Arabic there, but perhaps a scholar who's familiar with West African Arabic could be of better help than I could, right?
Yeah.
But he's saying, nor is it impossible to read into them certain recognizable phrases from the Quran. I can read into them 2 phrases of that. So even here, the 3 scholars are all, one, despite not seeing Arabic, says that he could theoretically see a phrase. So I'm assuming,
basically he's saying he thinks it looks like it. Yeah, you know, that's the gist of what it's not Arabic, but you could see how it bears some resemblance, you know, and therefore you could impose an Arabic reading there that's not actually there. That's what he's saying. So yeah, the resemblance is there.
So look what he says. He says, nor is it impossible to read into them certain recognizable phrases from the Quran. I can read into them 2 phrases, in fact, but these would constitute imposition of a text upon the markings, which can be done basically with any set of sufficiently complex traces, which is exactly what you've been arguing for.
Exactly.
The idea that if you look at these markings, you can come up with any kind of theories. You could say that you see the Greek omega. You could see Ge'ez characters, which is what Ephraim Isaac tended to posit. Even though he never posited phrases, he posited letters that you know, like da 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 da,
and
you know, la 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 la,
as possibilities. See, they misrepresented Ephraim Isaac and tried to make it seem like he was saying, "Oh, it's definitely Ge'ez." What he was saying is that some of the markings resemble Ge'ez characters. They look like Ge'ez characters, but you know, he wasn't saying definitively, you know, here's my final dogma as a scholar and a high priest that you have to accept, you know.
Right. So we see right here where the relevant scholar on your screen says, which can be done basically with any set of sufficiently complex traces. By contrast, the image referenced in your second footnote clearly contains Surah 112 from the Quran, and is immediately now. Is he talking about the in the footnote? So he's talking about
the text from that's at the University of Pennsylvania, where
the University of Pennsylvania,
where a slave wrote a different chapter of the Quran from memory.
Now, the ironic part there is that even when the slave wrote that Quranic verse, he was writing it a little sloppily, and you know, there were certain portions that if one looked at it, one would say, this seems like it was written by someone who, you know,
Well, yeah, and that's important because now as they try to build their case against Arabic on a pew, they try to pretend like someone has to practically be a scholar in Arabic, when the reality is if you're claiming that a slave is writing this, a man who's in the horrific conditions of slavery, obviously, you know, I mean, it's just to try to make them be like master calligraphers or something like that is absurd. Is that these men are writing these things under brutal conditions, and therefore it's understandable if there's a certain level of sloppiness.
Can I show Richard Saracen, because they tried to make an appeal to Richard Saracen, more specifically Richardson. He tried to make an appeal to the Saracen, and I thought this was interesting. This was from the We Woke Now Exposed Part 2 video on my channel. And so it says right here, this is Saracen, and I believe he had a correspondence with Garfield.
Yeah.
And so Garfield Reed from Dagger Squad. Again, we're not endorsing Garfield Reed on this channel, but Garfield did have a correspondence with Richardson, and he did bring it to our attention. So we are showing this by permission of Garfield. So, so it says, "Dear Mr. Reed, please forgive me for not getting back to you in a timely fashion. I had a lot on my plate over the past 3 weeks. Reverend Alvin Elmore in Chicago had introduced me to the pew markings in the First African Baptist Church in a little over 6 years ago. I had a chance to inspect them in person when my wife and I were in Savannah in May of 2015. There is no question in my mind that the carvings on the pews are intentional and are meant to be a kind of script. They are not Hebrew." I'm going to say that one more time. They are not Hebrew. This is Richard Saracen's conclusion.
Yeah, and by the way, there's 2 points to be made about this real quick. Point number one, the approach of Kelly Richardson and William Brown, their approach is if you get a scholar to say it's not Arabic on a pew, boom, it's done. It's not Arabic. The case for Arabic is destroyed. However, when a scholar, a Hebraist, says it's not Hebrew, they're like, oh, well, that's just his opinion. Let's move on. We can make a case for Hebrew without him. That's another example of their double standards. But go ahead.
Let me point this out, though, for the audience. Not only did you reach out to a scholar who is proficient in both Hebrew and Arabic, the top chair at Cambridge University, who said it was Arabic and not Hebrew. Here you have Saracen, who is a professor of Hebrew, saying, while there are certain, and I'll continue reading where he says,
wait, can I add one more thing? So their whole thing was, he sent them a picture of the pew highlighted. So, he manipulated them, which is what they did with Bunis. But check this out. Saracen, as you're about to bring out, was there in person. Nobody sent him highlighted photos. He went to the church. In the church, in person, looking at the pews in person. Go ahead, continue.
Right. So he says, they are not Hebrew. Though some individual markings are similar to the formation of some Hebrew letters, there are no Hebrew words discernible there. Some of the markings bear some similarity to Arabic script, but here too I can't find anything consistent, though I am not fluent in Arabic. Still, Arabic is written entirely horizontally, and all the letters in single words are conjoined. I did not find that consistently in the pews either. So here he's saying he doesn't see Arabic, but he certainly doesn't see Hebrew, right? And I think this is significant because it undermines, because it seemed like he tried to make an appeal to Saracen, talking about Richardson. He attempted to make an appeal to Saracen in his video. So I'll just show it very quickly. This was from his video. No, this is from, here we go. So this is the part of his video where he attempted to make an appeal to Saracen, right here. So Saracen is going over, and he essentially says roughly what you've been saying the whole time, right? There are certain things that look like certain things, but they're in the context of things that are not Hebrew. So therefore, one cannot posit that Hebrew is on the pew, right? In the same way that you said that there are certain characters that they look like they could resemble characters that look like they might be Hebrew, but they're within the context of other things that don't look like Hebrew. Therefore, discernible language does not appear to be on the pew, which has been your argument this whole time.
From the jump. Yep, from the very beginning.
From the very beginning. And here you have a scholar who's never had a conversation with you personally, saying the same thing that you've been saying this whole time.
Exactly. And what's funny about this is that for Kelly Richardson to think that Richard Saracen was, or to pretend like Richard Saracen was saying something different from what I've been saying, it's indicative at best, it's indicative of him not thinking about the methodology, not thinking about the points that have been presented along the way. He's not approaching this in a way that takes into account one's methodology. And so therefore at best, he missed that. At worst, he was deliberately, skewing the conversation and misrepresenting it.
So overall, what we have observed from the folks on the Kelly Richardson, Will Brown side of the fence, is that there seems to be a strawmanning of our position, more specifically your position, and there seems to be I think, misrepresentation, a consistent misrepresentation of what they perceive to be evidence, appeals to scholars. In fact, if we could just for a moment, and after this, I think we can segue into something that I find most interesting regarding Kelly Richardson himself. But I think it's interesting that the whole Richard Katz fiasco, because it went from falling, the whole appeal to Bunis fell apart when it was discovered that Bunis didn't actually endorse their position when we reached out to Bunis. Then they invented a scholar who happened to be Will Brown himself, pretending to be a Hebraist in Tel Aviv. Mm-hmm. And then when that backfired on them terribly, it seemed to be the case that once the Richard Katz stuff backfired, it was discovered that Will Brown was Richard Katz, the Richard Katz persona, that then they wanted to attempt to go silent. They wanted to kill off the Katz character. Now, then they tried to feign, they seem to feign almost, I don't want to say
they claimed that
outrage,
we harassed
not even outrage. No,
they tried to feign outrage because they made this completely fictional story about us harassing Buddhists, and then they claimed we harassed Katz.
Right, and the ironic part was that obviously Katz was William Brown, and there we have an example of when that fell apart for them. They noticed that they went especially silent, and then they wanted to move away from that topic. Now, here's the thing. Let's just be honest. Let's be on record about this, y'all. If they honestly felt that we were lying on them, right? We never lied. We went with all the available evidence, the writing style, everything. I mean, there was a plethora of stuff. You brought it out in several videos. All the evidence pointed in the direction of Will Brown being Katz. Very obvious, right? Mm-hmm, Once it came to light, did you notice that Will Brown became especially silent? Did you notice that the same Kelly Richardson who would feign outrage and want to go with litigation against us over minute details, all of a sudden the arguments for litigation went out the window. You would think that if we had truly
briefly, William Brown announced on a YouTube community post that Katz himself was going to sue us. He tried that,
and
Katz
then he took it down.
And I think he took it down. I'm guessing because someone told him, "Come on, man, that's ridiculous."
Yeah, Katz is going to sue us. Like, yeah, so Will Brown is going to go into the courtroom, wearing a William Katz, pretend to be like a white Israeli or something with like a mask, and like, I mean, how is he going to pull that off? It's obvious.
Let's be honest. They haven't delivered on any of their threats of litigation or legal action, so it was just one more bluff for their audience. That's really what I think it is at this point. It's a bluff for their audience.
But do you notice that they have conveniently wanted to move away from that point? Now, I'm bringing it up now for the record. I think it's pretty clear for anyone who has been following this that these men have been extremely deceptive. Can we say that officially? Can we be on record? I want you to be on record.
What I'll say is that the pattern has been, it seems like a deliberate effort to distract from discussion on the markings themselves. From the jump, it's been threats of litigation, feigning outrage, manufacturing controversies, but so much of it is designed to take the discussion away from discussing the markings. All I ever wanted to do was just discuss the markings with these guys, and they're the ones that have consistently taken it where it's gone,
And I do got to say this right now, because given certain things, let me just show this in the video, and this will help me segue into the next portion that I'd like to discuss with you. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to show this from your video from the, let me actually pull it up if you just give me a second. Mm-hmm. You had certain bullet points. All right, here we go. I think this is interesting, and it'll help segue right into the next topic. So this part right here in the video, this part I'm about to show, we couldn't trust his team, talking about Kelly Richardson's team's representation of their correspondence with David Bunis. We couldn't trust his channel when it presented a new correspondence with an alleged Tel Aviv-based professor of Hebrew named Richard Katz, which we later found out was actually William Brown pretending to be a guy named Richard Katz in Tel Aviv. We couldn't trust the claim that those who disagreed with him were placed on a secret government watch list, and that it was the government which was trying to flag videos that disagreed with him. We couldn't trust his channel when it presented an alleged newspaper article from the quote-unquote Israeli Daily News. right, which was a meme generator. And with all due respect to him, we should neither ask he should neither ask us nor expect us to simply trust him now. Now, speaking of which, there's something that I've been giving some thought to. He claims to be Dr.
A few people have found that curious, because the thing is, let me word this carefully. In the midst of this controversy, in which multiple people have concluded that his team created a fake doctor, that being Dr. Richard Katz, it's a fake PhD, the sock puppet. It's interesting that in the midst of this controversy, he started referring to himself on social media as Dr. Kelly Richardson, and a number of people have found the timing awkward, because it seems, unless he really did get a legitimate doctorate within the midst of this controversy, it seems like an awkward time to start calling yourself that, to christen yourself a doctor. So people have asked, a number of people have asked, what is his doctorate in? What subject is it in? And what institution did he get his doctorate from? And when did he get it? There's all these questions. He's just Dr. Kelly all of a sudden, and it's curious. It's curious in the least.
So let me do something real quick. I want to show a clip, and I believe this is from Dante Fortson's show.
Yes. So
let me actually do this very quickly.
We were wondering about this when he seems to answer the question on Dante Fortson's show. So at least he answers one question. The first question is, if he's a doctor, what is his doctorate in? Is it a PhD? Is it an MD? Like, for example, did he get a medical degree, or did he get a doctorate in some other field? Like, what exactly is his doctorate in? And if it's a PhD or something else, we'd love to see his dissertation. But yeah, this is from Dante Fortson's show back on February 8th. He put a comment in the live chat from Kelly Richardson on the screen. By the way, for the record, I'm not sure if anyone else heard that. I didn't hear that. I didn't hear anything. Yeah, I don't think the audio is playing over.
Oh, wait, you didn't hear that the whole time?
No.
Oh, okay. Let me try that one more time.
I didn't hear it.
I apologize, y'all. All right, let's try this one more time. Let's try this one more time.
All right, let me get down here. Pastor Kelly, shout out to Pastor Kelly. I paid so much money to achieve DD only to see that it's nothing more than a paperweight. The only benefits for me is historical arguments. Also purchased Tudor Prophet's book, Hybrid Hate. He's coming out swinging. All right, y'all heard of Tudor Parfit's book, Hybrid Hate. He's coming out swinging. So, yeah, definitely need to check that out. And for those that don't know what a DD is, that's a doctrine of divinity, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and a lot of these degrees are paperweights, honestly, whether it be from a seminary or whether it be from a regular university.
All right, we could all hear it that time. So what's significant is at least Kelly Richardson answered the first question, which is, so what exactly is your doctorate allegedly in? And so apparently a DD, as Dante Fortson pointed out, that's a doctorate of divinity. Something relates to something you might get from a seminary or something like that. And nonetheless, a legitimate doctor DD would have a seminary go along. Seminary, excuse me.
Just to be on record about something very quickly, even though it's a little off topic. When he mentions Hybrid Hate, I don't think they've actually read that book. I own the book.
Oh yeah,
and there are portions as well. There's actually portions in that book that completely destroy their arguments, particularly against Ashkenazis, especially when you look at the Hitler quotations, what he had to say about the Ashkenazis and who he equates them with.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that another time. There will certainly be time to talk about that. But as far as the doctorate stuff, I find that very telling. So, for me personally, I find it a bit odd, right, that now he's trying to self-identify as Dr. Kelly. Now, here's the thing. So he claims to have received his degree, right? His doctorate,
a DD specifically. And now the question still becomes, or the question, the unanswered question so far is, from where though? From which institution? You know, because here's a point, real quick. This is why we may have sounded a bit redundant earlier, talking about methodology. But a point that I was trying to make, and this has been a real concern of ours. I've talked about this with vocab. When you go through academia, you begin to develop a sense of proper argumentation and of methodology. And you're not the type of person who's going to be completely emotional where, when someone presents a counterpoint to your own argument where, you start to engage in ad hominems and all this. So Kelly Richardson, with all due respect to our friend, his approach seems like one that has not gone through the rigors of academia. Now again, as I pointed out, I went, I finished undergrad and I went through grad school, but I do not have a doctorate. For Kelly Richardson to have a doctorate would imply that he went further within academia than I did. And so I would figure he would be as familiar with, or more familiar with, the rigors of academia, yet the way he argues gives the strong impression that he's not familiar with such. And that's what sort of breeds this skepticism about his self-description.
Well, could I show something? We have a screenshot here, and so this is apparently the place where he received this apparent doctorate. Let's actually show this. If you can give some insight into what I'm about to show on the screen. All right.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So this was a Facebook post by Rehoboth International Bible College, some international Bible college, and they're listing their people who have acquired degrees of one sort or another in 2019, and listed there is Pastor Kelly Richardson, who received an honorary doctorate of divinity. And that's a that's a significant point, that it wouldn't even be a mainstream doctorate. It was an honorary doctorate, which is different from, an earned doctorate to some degree. That's worth noting.
Right. All right. So let me do something real quick. Let's see. So let me actually going to show the relevant. Let me actually close some of these windows before I forget. All right, so what we can do now is take a look at the relevant website of this institution.
And this is where it becomes interesting, because I think at this point, people might be thinking, wait, Rehoboth International Bible College. I've never heard of that before. Is that an accredited institution? That should be the next question.
Is it accredited? Let's actually let me do something real quick. Let me make the text larger because that's very small. All right, so yeah, I mean that is a salient question that needs to be addressed. Is it accredited? Let me actually do something real quick. Oh man, the surprises never end. Okay, let me actually show it. Lots and lots of surprises from that side, huh?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, here we go.
So this is the official website of Rehoboth International Bible College.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Our college, Rehoboth International College, firmly believes that accountability is important. By the way, just out of curiosity, the website's not secure, which I find a bit interesting. I don't know. Believes that accountability is important. This is why we feel that accreditation is very important to ensure our students that they are receiving a quote unquote worthy education.
Thank goodness they put an emphasis on accreditation, right?
Yeah, and study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. In the King James reading of 2 Timothy 2:15. Okay, so accreditation. Let me actually do this. Let me actually expand this real quick so the audience probably can see it better. Build upon a foundation. I mean, that text is a little. Isn't that text a little close to the? I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm nitpicking. Built upon a foundation of diversity and a common belief, our college is flourishing, and not simply in numbers, but with character, camaraderie, and a central community. Simply stated, we are working and walking the path paved with values instilled in us by the teachings of the Bible. We encourage you to attend Rehoboth International Bible College, especially if you are seeking especially if you are seeking be a part of
missing a
winning
preposition there.
of winning souls effectively for the kingdom of God. Always remember, the body is compacted by what each joint supplies. Rehoboth International College is accredited under the umbrella of New Covenant International Bible College of Columbia, South Carolina, by the World Council of Post-Secondary and Religious Education, 701 St. Andrews Road, number 325. Ooh, I don't know what just happened there. 325 Columbia, South Carolina.
Yeah, we don't need to go through the. So the gist of it is that the question is this an accredited institution? Well, the website says it is. It's an accredited institution. It says it receives its accreditation ultimately from this organization called the World Council of Post-Secondary and Religious Education. So, okay, so they claim they are an accredited institution.
Okay,
that answers that question.
So this is the World Council of Post-Secondary and Religious Education. All right.
Their website. Interesting.
It says, welcome to the official site of the World Council of Post-Secondary and Religious Education. The Council of Post-Secondary and Religious Education is a part of the Education Department of the World Natural Health Organization. There are two types of accrediting bodies. The first being the U.S. Department of Education controlled and monopolized accreditation.
Wait a minute. Uh-oh.
And you notice something too? This website is not secure. So this one isn't secure. This, I don't know. I'm not trying to be conspiratorial here, but let's read this one more time. There are two types of accrediting bodies. The first being the U.S. Department of Education controlled and monopolized accreditation, which they refer to as quote unquote recognized accreditation, i.e. legitimate accreditation.
Yeah, exactly. So this this is private accreditation. So it's
the
unrecognized.
Second, private accreditation that is not associated with the U.S. Department of Education nor controlled by it. The World Council of Post-Secondary and Religious Accreditation is a private accreditation body and is not associated with the U.S. Department of Accreditation, i.e. we are not legit, but we're going to say we're legit in essence.
Well, yeah, we'll put it this way. We'll say that it's not part of the the Department of Education. This is a private sort of institution that's doing their own system of unrecognized accreditation. And this, so when the most polite way we could put it is, while the relevant Bible college describes itself as accredited, its system is, it's not part of a standard system of education. So it's sort of an internal private matter. They're bestowing these titles on one another in a way that's outside the sphere of standard academia. So
if one were to try to get a job at a accredited university with any sort of degree from any of these places, this sort of stuff will immediately be looked at as a little shaky, a little
as lacking. Yeah. It's lacking some things.
Yeah, it's a little shaky.
No, to be fair, right? We could still ask the question. Who knows? Maybe Kelly Richardson did one heck of a dissertation at this unaccredited institution. So Vocab has mentioned he'd love to see his dissertation. Most people who have doctorates are willing to share their dissertations. They want people to see their dissertations. So I'd be curious, what was his dissertation on, and can we see it? I'd love to look it over. But oh well. But then again, if it's an honorary degree, you don't need a dissertation. I mean, you don't need to do a dissertation if it's an honorary degree.
Well, let's look at Rehoboth International Bible College. Their honorary doctorate degree programs. Interesting. Rehoboth International Bible College, RIBC, as with most institutions of higher education, does award honorary degrees. Unlike some other institutions, RIBC does not sell its honorary degrees. However, to offset evaluation, processing, and shipment costs, there is $500 non-refundable administration fee. So interesting. $500.
We're not selling it to you, but you got to pay us $500.
You got to pay $500.
And remember, Kelly Richardson himself mentioned that it was expensive.
It was so $500 is expensive for him
Well, I mean, it's not everybody has it. I certainly can't throw $500 right now at an honorary degree from Rehoboth. So,
but a legitimate degree from an accredited
of course,
institution
it'd be a lot more than that. Yeah,
would be significantly larger than $500, right?
yeah, yes, of course.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. Curious, as you like to say. It's a little curious, right? Some curious things going on there. I find that fascinating. That is amazing. So
we're speechless. We're speechless.
Okay, so basically, the relevant website that we looked at concedes that they're not a part of a recognized accredited accreditation system. With the Department of Education, they run their own thing on their own. So already there's a little bit of a shakiness there. Let's give a summary though. Let's give a summary of what we've looked at. Could you give a summary for the audience out there who might not be catching what's going on?
Okay, so ultimately the gist of it is that in the midst of this controversy of invoking, a fictional doctor, the gentleman began to self-identify publicly as a doctor himself, and so that caused others to ask, well, in what field? Is it a PhD, an MD? Is it something else? And also from what institution? And so now these questions seem to be answered. It seems that he got an honorary doctorate, emphasis on honorary, from an unaccredited institution. And we didn't, in this discussion, we haven't done much of a deep dive on that institution, but apparently it's started by a single person who herself does not have degree from an accredited institution. She also has an honorary degree.
Could you say that one more time? Just one more time for the audience, please.
Okay, so the gentleman received an honorary degree from an unaccredited institution, and the institution itself is very much a small and private operation, which was founded and predominantly run by a woman who herself does not have a degree from an established mainstream accredited institution. She herself she also identifies as doctor and has an honorary doctorate from yet another curious, small or obscure institution.
That is utterly fascinating. So curious things going on, man. Some curious stuff going on, man. A lot of curiosities, man. I do have to say this though. So for our good friend, the quote unquote doctor, being objective here, right? All things considered, regardless of where he got his degree, his knowledge of this subject in terms of just having this discussion on methodology, everything,
proper argumentation. That's
proper argumentation.
If you go all the way to a doctorate, regardless of what institution it's from, it should be you should develop a sense of proper argumentation.
Right. The interesting thing too about this is, and for the record, I plan on making a video as a response to his allegations of people turning down his debate offer. Abu, just very briefly, if we could talk about this.
Yes.
So you and I know that back last year,
December. Yeah, it was late December. So
no, not December. No, this is before December. Do you remember that this is when he put out that first video, right, where he was going at the UA community?
Oh, that was May. Yeah, May of 2020.
Do you remember that he and I had a correspondence where I called him out to debate? And you recall because I showed you the correspondence.
Yep.
And do you remember that he seemed to take this almost like his whole approach was he wanted to debate everybody about this whole who has shown better something about behavior,
Yeah.
But meanwhile, but hold on,
context is important. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So the context was in light of the fact that he was attacking everybody with disrespectful language, not disrespectful language that he was cursing at people, but just the manner in which he was going at people, referring to me as faithful to a God. And for the record, it makes me wonder if he realizes that at the end of my videos, I have an outro where I have faithful to YHWH. So is he inadvertently saying that YHWH is a God? Because I don't believe YHWH is a God, but whenever he takes little jabs at my name, I wonder if he realizes that he's actually taking an inadvertent jab at the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But, it's neither here nor there. Just wanted to point that out. But I think it's interesting, though, that the whole conversation started where, he had made his video, and I decided to call him out to debate. And what did I want to debate? I wanted to debate I did want to debate his ethnicity claims. I wanted to debate Lashawn Qadash, which we can get into in a moment. For those who don't know, Kelly Richardson is not a one Wester, but he endorses a Hebraic pronunciation system that was created at 1 West 125th Street in Harlem, New York City, by men who seemingly were ignorant of how Shemitic languages actually work, and more particularly biblical Hebrew. And so he seems to, and I'm not saying that Kelly Richardson learned from the camps. He very well may have learned from someone who himself watched videos on Lashawn Qadash from One Westers, various One Westers.
Yeah, Vocab has repeatedly said that our friend seems to show a lack of self-awareness on a lot of these topics, and that might be an example of such, because on the one hand, he if you mention any sort of influence of the One West groups, he feigns outrage. Oh, you're trying to poison the well. You're trying to make me look bad by by lumping me together with the camps. I'm not with the camps. And nobody's saying that he's like a member of a One West group, but he does employ their system of Hebrew pronunciation without even understanding it. He'll pretend like, oh no, the scholarship backs this. No, it doesn't. Like, for example, him. We'll get into this in future videos. But him saying the Sade is Taza is
we'll get into that second. Let's not. We'll get to Lashawn Qadash right at the end. But what I want to do is I want to talk about my interaction with Kelly Richardson in 2020. So this was shortly after he had put out the first UA No Dialogue, or UA's Exposed Part 1 or something like that. And what was interesting is I called him out to debate. And his response to that was essentially to turn down the debate offer, at least with me personally, on a one-on-one level. He continually insisted that he wanted to have a dialogue with all of us. And I was like, well, look, I can't speak for everyone else. I can only speak for me. And I came at him respectfully, correct? Abu, I was very respectful with him. And I told him we can have a debate. And he essentially, so I guess he turned down the debate offer at the very least at the time, because he was mentioning COVID. He said maybe in the future, but then in the future, I called him out to debate again. Ironically enough, during the time of the Katz fiasco, I called him out to debate on my channel live, right? And he didn't come into the live stream, and he decided to go on Brother Berean, and that's when he decided to do another debate challenge. And this was
one other thing to mention. There's one other thing to mention that in the October of 2020, he was on Berean at the same time as Vocab, and Vocab invited him to debate on the Pews, on specifically whether Hebrew appears on the Pews at the time, and he flatly turned that down. And that's and by the way, just to say clearly, him turning down offers to debate with you, him turning down a debate challenge from Vocab, what we were all saying at the time is fine. We're not going to force. You can't force people to debate, and we should respect a man's preference if he prefers not to have a formal debate with somebody, right? We could all respect that. Debating is not everyone's cup of tea. That was our attitude throughout 2020 when he was turning down these offers. But here it is then. Now we can jump to his recent thing. Right after the Katz fiasco dropped, right after it was exposed that this Katz character does not exist, he went on Berean and he declared that he was going to debate us on a completely different subject. Everyone wanted to discuss Katz. He wanted to discuss his behavior vis-a-vis the behavior of the entire UA community, whatever that means. Because keep in mind, some of these Israelites, they refer to the quote-unquote UA, but it's unclear what they mean. Like, some may remember that Dante Fortson was talking about the UA. And I asked him, I said, wait a minute, how do you, just so we know understand the parameters of what you're referring to, how do you define UA? And his answer was uneducated a-holes with an S and two S's after the A.
Wow. You know what's interesting about that? Wasn't this the same Dante Fortson that told G-Con that he can, if he wants to go suck a he can go ask G-Man because he gets down like that. So it's interesting that Dante exhibits this sort of behavior, and of course they'll try to point the finger at particular people within the community who have done things that they have been corrected on. For example, Cherry Love has been corrected by many of us behind the scenes for certain things that she's done out on, in the public sphere. But the ironic part is I don't think I've ever seen any of them actually correct people from their side. But needless to say, if that would have been the topic, let's just be honest here. Someone like yourself who has been very respectful from the onset. And keep in mind, a lot of the titles of the videos and thumbnails that are on my channel, a lot of those have been my personal interjections into his videos, not things that Abu himself has asked for me to put in the videos. Many of these things I've done independent of Abu. So, for example, even in the, We Woke Now Exposed, that's not the name of his original video on his channel. But needless to say, even there, in the very beginning, Abu was very forthright about me not having any titles, anything that would be deemed as disrespectful towards Kelly Richardson. Even when he did his first response, right? Mm-hmm. Which was on the Sister E channel, where it was like something like faithful to God or something like, what was it?
Yeah. The Pews discussion, faithful to God. That's where he
Georgia Pews or something like that. Yeah, faithful to God, right? And then in that video, he says, I can literally sue them. Now, here's the ironic part. Why hasn't he sued us?
It's been a year and a half now.
If what you did was wrong, which it wasn't, because anybody can go look at the relevant videos on the Georgia Pews, the first ones that you did in 2019, you were very respectful. Mm-hmm. And none of the videos in any way at all attacked his family, attacked anything. Nothing was personal. It was, in matter of fact, even the arguments that you made were strictly for the Pews, and they were respectful arguments. Mm-hmm. You were very
It was
careful.
Basically an invitation to further dialogue.
Right? But he took it as utter disrespect for whatever reason. So what I find fascinating about that, is, number one, the fact that he tried to feign outrage at that, which is amazing. And then number two, what I also find fascinating is he's been the one that has engaged in disrespectful behavior. Yep. Faithful to a God. That
we're all a bunch of witches. We're all a bunch of witches. That was one of his first claims.
What was the one? Slave catchers.
Yeah. Wait, can we talk about the slave catcher thing really quickly to explain that one? So here's a super quick history of our interactions on the Pews. Before I got involved in this topic with him, right? The church, he's upset. He's been upset since the church itself put on their website that the markings on the pews are Arabic, right? So he put out, and I think to Kelly Richardson's credit, this is a fair request. If you're going to claim that it's Arabic on the pews, why don't you read it to me? Why don't you tell me what it says, right? And that's a fair request. Mm-hmm. So we presented the same request to Kelly Richardson, that yes, if someone's going to claim there's Arabic on the pews, they should present a case for Arabic on the pews. They should transcribe what they think appears there. But by the same token, if you claim there's Hebrew on the pews, you should present a case for that. And he was outraged by that. And he said, this is what he said. He said that us asking him for evidence of Hebrew on the pews, after he asked for evidence of Arabic on the pews from the church, he said that this is no different from a slave catcher stopping a slave on the road and asking to see his receipts.
Wow.
And assaulting him if he doesn't have it. I mean, that's insane. And it just shows his double standards.
Utter insanity.
He's allowed to, if they say Arabic, it's perfectly fair game to say, well, what's the evidence for Arabic? But somehow, if someone says Hebrew and you say, well, what's the evidence for that? That's the spirit of the slave catcher. That's literally what he said.
Well, let me do something real quick. This is from the video that's on my channel where you interacted with the poor points that Kelly Richardson was making in his the spirit of, what was it? The spirit of
Benita Betrell, which is a character from In Living Color.
In Living Color. Yeah. Right. So even there's disrespect, right? Yeah, it's interesting.
And he was directing that at Berean. That's one of the other things that's very interesting is Berean was extremely respectful to that crowd. And, once he started raising some fair questions, they turned on him.
Well, let me do this right quick. So in this video, he claims, even though the audience can't hear it, he says that Abu's never shown a methodology for Arabic being on the pews, and here you are. This is the case for Arabic from 2020. Pardon me, revisited. In fact, in 2019, you did the first video, right? Yeah, there we go. So there's a video from 2019. So from the onset, you were the one who presented a methodology, and you actually demonstrated it, and you used these relevant highlightings to show. So the audience could see what is being demonstrated, right? And for whatever reason, you've shown this, but Kelly claims that you never showed any sort of evidence. Are you kidding me? That you never showed a methodology for demonstrating, like it's like he projects everything that he is onto others, right? Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that he will project onto others what he does?
Yeah. Well, I was going to say the most charitable thing I could say, because the thing is, there's even another video that I didn't show where I give the transcription again. It was you know, we had another thing on. It was when I got into the stuff with Ge'ez before, and what had happened was, and it's funny because Kelly Richardson took clips from the video, but in that video, I had shown the transcription yet again because he had said, "Oh, Abu only proposed 2 characters," and I say, "No, I actually proposed 8 characters. You know, Aleph Lam Ha, Aleph Lam Nun, Aleph Sin." I put that in a video and I put it on the screen. He took clips from that video, so he must have seen that. So while, you know, to be charitable, I'd say, well, maybe he didn't see my transcription. But honestly, being that it appeared in at least 3 videos, for him to say that, I have to lean towards it being deliberate misrepresentation for the sake of his audience.
Right.
You know, because it's.
You know what I want to do? I want to do a side-by-side comparison of his proposed reading, which, by the way, this was the first time that he proposed a reading from the very moment that you had asked him to demonstrate a reading. You know, it's funny, he didn't do any.
There were 14 months. There were 14 months of. I had from the very jump. I said you have to propose a reading if you expect people to, you know, to take seriously your claim of language on the pews. And he went 14 months without doing so. You know,
until Benayah finally stepped to the plate, and then somehow he seemed to get a little brave after the Bunis stuff. It was funny. He proposed a reading after the Bunis stuff fell apart for them. That's when he decided to propose, and then he said, "David Bunis doesn't endorse my position, but I'm going to go ahead and use his methodology for the Solitero to demonstrate."
And by the way, can we say that that's ironic as well? Because that's another one of their double standards. You know, when it comes to us, their whole thing was the scholar has spoken, let the non-scholars be quiet. You know, like somehow like scholars are high priests and now we have to simply defer to them. Yet when they got a scholar of Solitero to, you know, to look at these pews and say, you know, and he said, I don't see any Solitero on the pew. All of a sudden, the non-experts can speak and you don't have to defer to the scholar anymore. They're the ones that continuously move the goalposts, continuously change the rules. But go ahead.
But by the way, in the Arabic video revisited, in that video, did you show his reading? Like, is it the same reading? Okay, so let me go to that video.
There's one difference. His original reading only had 4 yods. Now it has 5. But yeah, otherwise it's the same.
He has 5. Wow.
5 yods. Yod Zayin Resh.
Yod 5 yods.
Lamed. Right. Originally it was only 4 yods. Yod Zayin Resh.
Okay, so I'm showing it right now. Here it is. It's very. So I'm gonna show his reading, and then I'm gonna show your proposed reading, right? For the thought experiment. Your thought experiment, right?
Yep.
Let me just do this very quickly. If I could just go there. All right, here we go. All right. So I want the audience to tell me.
And in that video, by the way, at the end, I went through why the case for Arabic is stronger than the case for Solitero that he presented, you know?
Yeah. All right. So here we go. So this was his proposed reading, right?
Yep. There it is.
All right. So this is complete gibberish, right? This right here is gibberish. This is
completely ahistorical. You know, he's acting like, that just says Israel. No, it doesn't. No one has ever spelled Israel that way. You know, you can't find a single source which has that string of characters in it. I'm confident he can't find that.
And this is hold on a second. Oh boy, I got to go back now. All right, here we go.
There it is. You just had it a second ago. Yeah.
Yes. So this is your proposed reading.
Right. Which
is a thought experiment. Not that you actually believe Arabic is there, but if one were to make a case for Arabic, this would be the most plausible case. Now, here's the thing. While this would be considered a sloppy form of Arabic, right?
Yeah, well, keep in mind, handwritten Arabic is often sloppier than printed Arabic. And more importantly, this would be carved into a piece of wood. So it's even harder, you know? Like, I mean, do you have people that have been writing in in English for decades, but try and carve it into a piece of wood, and you're going to see your handwriting's going to get a lot sloppier. It's not like writing with pen and paper.
So let's look at this real quick. So this completely ahistorical phrase with with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yods.
Yeah,
and
a Zion.
1, 2, 3, and a Zion.
Yisrael spelled with a sin, not a Zion. And he was like, "Oh, but the Zion and sin can be interchangeable." I'm like, okay.
So let me point this out. Why is he proposing Yisrael as opposed to Yashar Allah, which is what he should be proposing given his faulty pronunciation system of Lashawn Qadash?
Yeah, it's a fun question. What's funny is that also shows a lack of self-awareness. They, if I can segue just for a second, I remember when Harry Rosenberg, and Rabbi Harry Rosenberg is very sympathetic to the Hebrew Israelite position, when he had a live discussion with Ron Dalton, he asked a very fair question. He wasn't being hostile. Rosenberg is not the least bit hostile to the Israelites. He said, being that you describe yourself as descending from the Sephardic Jews, what doctrines do you have in common with them? Because we know what they taught. We know what Maimonides taught. We know what, And Ron Dalton became enraged, and tried to change the topic to, Harry Rosenberg as a convert, which was it was so silly because it was a fair question. Now, I bring that up because so too here, if you're claiming a connection to the Sephardic Jews and you're claiming that this is the way they wrote Israel, why not adopt this alleged system of Hebrew pronunciation? Why continue with Yasharal and all this stuff?
But not only that, why not demonstrate that the Sephardic Jews wrote Israel in this form?
Oh yeah, he can't do that. I'm going to put that on record. He cannot produce a single source that spells Israel that way, which drops the aleph, which replaces the sin with a Zion and uses 5 yods. I mean, come on. But go ahead, continue.
But let's do something very quickly. Number one, you've done multiple videos where you've shown that Kelly Richardson doesn't actually know Hebrew, right? He endorses a faulty pronunciation system that's commonly called Lashawn Qadash, right?
Mm-hmm.
This pronunciation system, if you could give a very abridged history of Lashawn Qadash for the audience out there who might not be familiar with the subject.
Lashwan Qadash is they claim it's ancient Hebrew. It's the oldest form of Hebrew. What it ultimately is modern Israeli Hebrew, stripped of its range of vocalizations. It's reduced to a situation where each Hebrew character has only one possible vocalization, and that's the ah vocalization, with the exception of the ayin. They pronounce the ayin I. But all the other characters are simply have an ah vocalization, a class vowel. So it's ba ga da ha, like that. And then
right. And then the ayin which makes the I as in pi sound.
Yeah,
right.
And then the sade, bizarrely, they pronounce taza. And it's amazing that Kelly Richardson promotes that without understanding what happened there, and then pretending like it's ancient, pretending like the evidence supports it.
But by the way, let's talk about that for a moment. Regarding that dialect system, it was on record from all the available evidence from various Hebrew Israelite groups. The only group that seemed to promote that dialect, that pronunciation system, was One West. It is original to them.
Yep.
Meaning that the commandment keepers, all these other groups, they were using conventional forms of Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, whereas these folks decided to create their own pronunciation system.
Not only that, so Kelly Richardson, I think what's happening is, a friend or a family member imbibed Lashawn Qadash over the internet, and then Kelly Richardson learned from that friend or family member. That's the most charitable.
This is speculation.
This is speculation. This is the most charitable speculation I could offer, since he claims he didn't get this from One West. And I think it's worth pointing out that Kelly Richardson, when you watch his videos, and this is going to come out in future videos, when you watch his videos where he attempts to teach Hebrew, he even uses Aria's diacritics. People don't know this, but Aria at One West created his own system of diacritics.
Let me show that. Let me show that on my screen very quickly.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to the modern influence on Lashawn Qadash. Let me actually do that very quickly. You have a video that's on my channel as well. It's very informative. I got it right here. Let me just close this window. All right, here we go. Introduction to Lashawn Qadash diacritics. Ironically enough, it hit right on that part. All right, here we go. So I'm going to share my screen. And what we could do is we can, I'm going to have the volume turned off, but
there you go.
Yep. And so this is an example of the ISUPK right here, writing out. And so these are the diacritics right there underneath the relevant letter.
It looks like a frown and a smile, over and over again.
Right.
So Kelly Richardson doesn't use the and this frown, but he uses a smile. And
this is the image from the old ICUPK school, right? This is the old One West school.
Yep. The ICUPK. Their famous icon of Christ, and it's even there. It's even on the, Yeah,
there it is. And let me actually see if I could find. Yeah, here we go. These are the notes from the original school. All right, there we go. And there are the diacritics right there.
Yep.
Right.
So Arian created his own system of diacritics, and Kelly Richardson uses them, which is, it allows us to sort of create a digital paper trail of sorts to figure out the level of influence. Even if he's learning from a friend or family member, that's what happened. Maybe a family member of his, a cousin of his, hypothetically speaking, learned Lashawn Qadash off the internet, and then Kelly Richardson learned it from him. That friend or family member is almost certainly learning from ISUPK videos, because ISUPK is the group which still promotes the use of these diacritics, these modern diacritics created.
Does GMS do it at all? GMS doesn't.
I mean, maybe rarely, but extremely rarely. But it goes back to One West. And
so here's an example of how the diacritics can drive the pronunciation of relevant characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
which they accuse, obviously modern Israeli Hebrew of doing with the diacritics. But then here you have their own pronunciation system having diacritics that influence the way that particular characters are pronounced.
It's one of the funniest things in the world that they'll say, oh, the nikudot, which is the diacritics you see in the Masoretic text. They'll go, that didn't come about until the 9th century, and so that's the grounds for rejecting it. Yet they're going to run with a system of diacritics created in the late 20th century.
Right. Something I find fascinating here is if I could show it, although I plan on having it in a subsequent video, which is going to be premiering on Sunday. Let me actually just stop this. I wanted to show very quickly just some brief portions of the relevant video.
If you can show that clip of the thing about the O sound, you don't have to play it, but about whether there's an O sound in Hebrew. On the screen, you see a graphic that Kelly Richardson made, where he's attempting to show something in Hebrew, and you can see the diacritic on there. You'll see what was called the connector, the Ariya connector. I don't know what Kelly Richardson calls it, but
yeah, that's what I was about to do. I was going to go there, but in the meantime, so interestingly enough, while he wants to be disassociated from the camps, he's inadvertently using a pronunciation system that has its origins in the camp, in the camps, in the One West camps. Isn't that fascinating?
Yep.
All right, so if you just give me a second, I'm just going to go ahead and pull this up on my end. All right, here we go. All right. Just give me a second. All right, so I'm going to show the all right, here we go. I'm just going to show the image on my screen now. So to give people some context of what we were talking about with the diacritics, here we go.
Okay, yeah, if you could just pause that. You're good. It's already paused. Excellent. So on your screen, you see 3 Hebrew characters in the Phoenician script, or the quote-unquote Paleo-Hebrew script, right? From right to left, it's Ayin, Dalet, Ta, right? Or he would say I, Da, Tha, right? And you notice there's a little line in between, underneath the second and third character, what looks like an X and a triangle. That's one of Ariya's diacritics. That's what Ariya called the connector. And the reason why he uses that, the reason why they developed it, is because even with Lashawn Qadash, there was a question about when do you pronounce the last character and when do you not. So, for example, they'll say shalom, where they don't vocalize the M, the mem, at the end of shalom, or shalom, as Kelly Richardson was relevant to this video. Yet in other places, that for Israel, they'll say Yashar Allah, rather than Yashar al, which is meaning they're vocalizing the last character. So there was a question of when do you vocalize a character and when do you not. And Ariya created his own system of 20th century Lashawn Qadash diacritics, in which it would help guide the eyes in understanding when to vocalize a character and when not. So when you see this connector, it's supposed to signify that the second character connects 2 characters and the second character is not vocalized. Kelly Richardson imbibed this from somebody who, if he didn't get it off the internet, then he imbibed it from somebody who was getting it off the internet, and he doesn't seem to understand where it comes from.
And Sean says, Shalom, my fam in Jesus. So here's the thing that I find most fascinating, right? Kelly Richardson has attempted to feign knowledge of Hebrew, and yet it's very clear from just observing is you got background.
Sorry about that.
So it seems that Kelly Richardson attempts to feign knowledge of Hebrew, right? Confident knowledge of Hebrew. He attempts to teach it. But it's very clear when one observes his teaching videos on Hebrew that he, more times than not, doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Generally speaking, he doesn't know what he's talking about when it comes to Hebrew, when it comes to understanding grammar, syntax, when it comes to understanding tenses, when it comes to understanding how stems work within the language, understanding things like perfect, imperfect,
even plurals. We brought this out, that one of the great ironies is that we've seen from his teachings that Hebrew has a concept where when you have a masculine plural in the construct state, i.e. when a masculine plural noun is possessed by something else, like for example children of Israel, where children or sons is possessed by Israel. So when you have a plural noun in the construct state, you drop the final character. You don't pronounce it and you don't write it. And Kelly Richardson was not aware of that, and that was reflected in his teachings. Ironically, who else wasn't aware of that? The great Hebraist, the great scholar and professor of Hebrew linguistics, Richard Katz.
Right. Right, aka William Brown. All right. So let's go ahead and show this. All right. So this is from the video. I'm going to show this on Sunday, obviously, but so the full video will be shown Sunday. So here you have the name of David's son, Abishalom, or in the King James reading, Absalom, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here we see Abe.
And by the way,
Salom.
let's say where this text is from. This is the third Psalm. This is Psalm 3 in Codex Sinaiticus.
Right. And so, and this would have been in the Septuagint. Obviously, Codex Sinaiticus includes the Septuagint in there.
Yes.
But the Septuagint would have had the same reading. The oldest copies of the Septuagint would have had the same reading.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, here you see the sigma, alpha, lambda, omega, and
Mu.
yeah, right. And so here you have the relevant phrase salom. Now, because there was no sh sound in Greek, the closest approximate was employed. So if we just include the sh sound, you have shalom
Mm-hmm.
in the relevant phrase. But here's something interesting. We also have this relevant phrase existing in the name of Shalomith or Shalomith in Leviticus 24, 10 through 11, in Codex Sinaiticus, also in the Septuagint, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So it exists in the Septuagint reading of Leviticus 24, 10 through 11. So I know the King James renders the relevant phrase Shalomith, but the Septuagint seems to indicate Shalomith.
Mm-hmm.
Shalom.
And either way, the main point that we're going in here is that, Kelly Richardson claims that there was no O vocalization, no O sound in Hebrew prior to the 9th century.
But let me point that out. But that even that relevant phrase is in the feminine, right?
Yeah.
So like saying Yehudit,
Yes.
which in English would be the name Judith,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the relevant character at the end indicates that the phrase is feminine. Oh, you broke up.
No, I'm still here. I'm sorry. I'll mute my phone.
So yeah, the relevant character at the end indicates that the name is, pardon me, the name is feminine. Shalomith. Can you hear me?
Correct. Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead. Continue.
Yes, but I want that to be on record for the audience out there, because I want them to hear that firsthand. And so the relevant phrase being feminine, we can say that phrase, the relevant name, is indicative of the very phrase for peace. Would that be correct? That the name itself indicates the very phrase for peace.
Yep.
The very one that Kelly Richardson claims isn't supposed to have the O vocalization, yet the ancient Israelites, in the Septuagint translation, rendered the phrase with an O vocalization when they put the omega, in the portion where the wa would have appeared in the Hebrew text, correct? Where the wa appears, they put an O vocalization, the omega, correct?
Yes, and then sometimes they put the omega where no wa appears, like for example in the transliteration of Jacob's name, because that's the thing. You can also get an O vocalization in Hebrew even without a wa being present. The wa is simply a mater lectionis, something that Kelly Richardson has invoked without understanding.
Right. Interesting. So let's do something very quickly. I've done this various times over. Do you mind if I show the relevant video on?
Yeah,
one
sure,
second. Yeah, the relevant video on. This thing seemed to freeze up on me for a second. I wanted to show the relevant video on the ancient evidence for the ancient evidence against Lashawn Qadash. So Lashawn Qadash has no ancient evidence in its favor. Right? We have all been on record saying this over and over. All the ancient evidence points against Lashawn Qadash being so-called ancient Hebrew by showing actual ancient Hebrew, right, in the form of transliterations, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So all the ancient evidence is against Lashawn Qadash. Right.
Qadash.
Qadash.
Yeah, remember Al-Azhar thought that was
important. Raw.
Yeah, to quote Tahar. Yeah,
the famous Hebrew linguist who doesn't actually know Hebrew Tahar. I don't know Hebrew. I'm not a speaker of Hebrew. All right, let me actually pull up. Yeah, let me actually play this video. All right, here we go.
mess on the fraudulent dialect known as Lashawn Qadash.
Let's go back to here. He says Eli, which is Eli. Why doesn't he say what he just said? No, it's not. You don't have an E sound in your fake language. There's no E sound. Okay, you have an E sound.
Prove to me there's an E sound in Hebrew at all without them dots. If you don't have them dots next to those letters, you don't know to make any of those sounds. When were those dots added to those letters? Who are the Masoretes?
Ironically, while Al-Azhar is essentially asking vocab to demonstrate that these other vocalizations that are not recognized by proponents of Lashawn Qadash, to demonstrate that these other vocalizations existed in Hebrew before the time of the Masoretes, before the Masoretes developed the various dots and dashes, the nikodot, which represent vocalizations. Ironically, Al-Azhar is making this request, but vocab has already demonstrated that with his appeal in the time of Christ. This ancient text transliterated it that way. It seems that the ancient writer understood that string of characters to be pronounced in precisely that way.
Hold on. Well, if I look in the ancient writings of Hebrew, I don't see vowels.
If by vowels, Al-Azhar means the dots and dashes of the Masoretic text, the nikud, the nikudot, if that's what he means, by this point, it should be obvious that those symbols are not required to vocalize the text in that way. The symbols represent vocalizations that existed before those symbols were developed. That's the key point here. This ancient text is clearly showing that the word was vocalized that way in the time of Christ. Relevant to questions about Hebrew pronunciation, and we'll get to that in a moment.
It still isn't Paleo, ancient, pre-exilic Hebrew. That's the point, vocab.
I'm sensing another shift in focus here. Note that vocab, when he started this out, he started out as a question about whether or not Jesus spoke Lashawn Qadash, while now Al-Azhar is talking about pre-exilic Hebrew. This raises an interesting question. Does Al-Azhar believe that the Hebrew spoken by Jesus, by Christ, was fundamentally different from the Hebrew spoken in pre-exilic times? That's an interesting question. But if his answer is no, that Jesus was speaking essentially the same language or roughly similar language to what was spoken in pre-exilic times, then we would be able to get a sense within the paradigm of that assumption. We would get a sense of what pre-exilic Hebrew was like, because we have a sense of what Hebrew was like in the time of Christ. And that's the issue here. But let's consider the other alternative. Let's suppose Al-Azhar says, well, actually, Hebrew in the time of Christ was fundamentally different from pre-exilic Hebrew. Okay, working within that paradigm, it seems to be that his assumption is that in pre-exilic times, they were speaking Lashawn Qadash, even though there's no evidence for that. But in the time of Christ, they weren't. That would beg the question, if people weren't speaking Lashawn Qadash in the time of Christ, why do you refer to him by a Lashawn Qadash name? Wouldn't it be the case that in his time, nobody was calling him, quote unquote, Yahushai? Wouldn't that be the case if people weren't speaking Lashawn Qadash then?
I'm supposed to just trust the Greek Septuagint, the source that
Something that
people
cried about
had days of mourning because of how poorly it was translated when you go into the history.
Septuagint studies is a deep and complex subject. If Al-Azhar or the other member of his group would like to discuss certain verses which they feel were translated incorrectly, we can discuss that. But I think, with all due respect to these gentlemen, they're being a bit too flippant. Nonetheless, even if you have disagreements with the way certain texts were translated, that doesn't lead to the conclusion that these men, the translators of the Septuagint, didn't know how Hebrew characters were pronounced. Their transliterations show an ancient understanding of how various Hebrew words were pronounced. And so I want to take a look at the Septuagint to show the significance of this fact. So let me show my Septuagint. We'll take my Septuagint off the shelf and we'll take a look in here. We're going to take a look at some of the transliterations that appear in this text. So first, let's go to First Chronicles chapter 6. You have the name Asir, which is spelled with an aleph. It starts with aleph, and so here it is right here. Asir, it's spelled with an aleph, yet it's transliterated with an alpha. Yet in the same verse, or the verse before, you have Elkanah, also spelled with an aleph, yet it's transliterated with an epsilon. Now, let's go to 2 Samuel, and where you have the name Ishtob, also spelled with an aleph, yet transliterated with an iota. Aside from that, let's jump to Genesis 36, where you have the name Omar, right? Omar, spelled with an aleph, transliterated with an omega. And let's jump back to First Chronicles chapter 6 again, and you have the name Uriel, spelled with an aleph, but transliterated with an omicron upsilon. Think about the implications of what was just shown. We have 5 different biblical terms, all starting with aleph, yet that initial character is transliterated 5 different ways. And this touches on a central point here. One major premise of Lashawn Qadash is that each Hebrew character has essentially only one possible vocalization. Meanwhile, the standard understanding of Hebrew, along with other Semitic languages like Arabic and Aramaic, posits that each Hebrew character has multiple possible vocalizations. The ancient transliterations that we just looked at provide clear examples of such. We see that in the ancient understanding, the aleph was not simply pronounced ah, rather it could be vocalized alternatively as ah, e, o, u, and we can show a similar spectrum for the other characters. Now, Al-Azhar wishes to voice his disapproval of the Septuagint, but we see a similar spectrum of vocalizations also appearing in the New Testament, in the writings of Josephus, and in the writings of Philo. Thus, we have a collection of ancient evidence in favor of the conclusion that, in the time of Christ, the Hebrew language had a spectrum of vocalizations which proponents of Lashawn Qadash claim were not part of Hebrew. Now, to be clear, this is not an argument in favor of modern Israeli Hebrew. However, it is an argument against Lashawn Qadash. I would put it this way. We have evidence, ancient evidence, in favor of a standard understanding of ancient Hebrew. Meanwhile, Lashawn Qadash has no evidence in its favor. To quote Berean, shots fired. Or to quote Garfield, dagger.
That is funny.
I can't hear you if you're still there. Oh, there you go. Yep. All right.
So it's interesting. Actually, let me switch mics. So if you could give us a brief outline of what we just saw and how this is relevant and how this actually undermines his argument for Lashawn Qadash.
Well, the point of it, I mean, I think it pretty much summed it up. But the point is that, as I mentioned at the end, you know, in the video I did that with the Septuagint, but you could do the same thing with the writings of Josephus. You can do it with the New Testament. You can do it with the writings of Philo. You can do it with the Vulgate. You can do it with various other sources. The point is that
also the Dead Sea Scrolls, because you have Greek manuscripts in the Dead Sea Scrolls with transliterations that fundamentally contradict Lashawn Qadash.
Exactly. So the gist of it is that proponents of Lashawn Qadash, including Kelly Richardson, so Kelly Richardson is on record saying, you know, there was no these different vocalizations that he doesn't recognize, that they didn't exist before the 9th century, that somehow it was created in the 9th century by the Masoretes, which is preposterous. But nonetheless, what we can do is we can see how Hebrew was pronounced in antiquity, because we have a number of transliterations into the Greek script and the Latin script where people who understood Hebrew quite well were writing down how they thought certain Hebrew words and names were pronounced. And so we can see from that Hebrew in antiquity had a range of vocalizations for each character, just like every Semitic language does. And that's the gist of it. And that's what undermines Lashawn Qadash. And that's why the case against Lashawn Qadash has ancient evidence, while Lashawn Qadash has no ancient evidence in its favor. Because it's a 20th century innovation.
Right, by men who were ignorant of how Semitic or Shemitic languages, if they prefer, languages actually work. More specifically, biblical Hebrew. But I did want to say this, though, before we wrap things up, because we're winding down. I wanted to say, can we be on record about something? I'll just say it. Something that was said to you in private from one individual who you named earlier, you know, regarding this gentleman in question, Kelly Richardson, and his fear of us tackling the subject of Lashawn Qadash?
Well, I mean, we're going to make more videos on Lashawn Qadash, and we're going to get into the subject.
But it seems that he was fearful in private with a.
Well, yeah, let's let that go. But yeah. I think Well, here's the interesting thing. Here's something that's really interesting. His cousin William Brown had Zion Lex on his show not too long ago. I forget how long ago it was, maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and William Brown asked Zion Lex about Lashawn Qadash. And Zion Lex flat out said it's nonsense, and Zion Lex, to his credit, has been a critic of Lashawn Qadash for years. And so it was interesting to see Kelly Richardson's cousin having Zion Lex on, and Zion Lex was saying, yeah, Lashawn Qadash is a completely made up system. It's fiction. But yeah, I think they sense that it has some problems. But Kelly Richardson has a teaching. There's a few teachings of Lashawn Qadash. He has one long video where he attempts to make a case for it, and we'll be addressing that in the near future. We're going to look at some of his stuff on Lashawn Qadash. And we would love to dialogue with him on that. Speaking of which, I had way back when we first started corresponding with Kelly Richardson and interacting with him, I had offered that we could correspond on the Sista E's forum. Let's talk with Sista E. It was a forum on Facebook, a public forum controlled by someone who's very loyal to him. So, because I know there's concerns, that a lot of these guys are afraid that if they come on our channels or something like that, that somehow we're going to censor them or abuse them or whatever, right? So that's why, okay, fine. If you're afraid that I might do that to you or somebody else might do that to you, let's do it on a forum that was, Sista E's forum, so that way, she's not going to censor him. And what happened was I tried to discuss Lashawn Qadash with him there. And initially, Sista E was okay with it, but he convinced her to basically delete my posts and kick me out of that forum. And then they set the forum to private. Even then, and that was a year ago, they were very anxious to. And
her response was something to the effect of, "I tried to reach out to them and this and that, and they didn't want to talk." Even though, to be on record about this, when we were on the phone with her,
let's make that clear. We've spoken to Sista E. It was back in October of 2019 because she wanted to set up a discussion with Kelly Richardson. Go ahead.
Yeah. And what ended up happening was you told her that given your schedule, you're a very busy man.
And I was extremely busy at that time.
Extremely busy, which I know for an absolute fact. Yeah. And what you ended up telling her was we can correspond in text. Yeah, I remember you saying that. I was a witness to that.
Yeah, I said specifically on her forum, because one of the benefits of that is we don't have to be on at the same time. Like that, you can attest to this. Back in those days, once every couple of months, I would appear on your show. But
she seemed okay with that idea.
She was. But just to give some clarity on that, back then you can attest to this. Like you would say, "Can you be on my show?" And I would say, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll be on your show, but can we do it like after midnight? Or I can't do it this month." Like it was very hard to get me on because I was so busy.
But to not confuse the audience, just so they know, we had a conversation with Sista on the phone, right?
Yes.
Where in an actual phone call, right, a cell phone call, and what ended up happening was was a conference call, and I was there as a witness, and Abu and Sista E both talked about how they would pretty much go about doing it, that she was going to set it up where there would be a dialogue, whatever the case is, and perceivably it was going to be a dialogue via audio, right, via voice, whether cell phone or whether some sort of whether Facebook, whatever, who knows. That part seemed a little ambiguous now.
Right. And no date was set. And she said so she had proposed that. I said, all right, we'll see if I can find some time. But in the meantime, perhaps we could also dialogue on your forum.
And she's like, okay, that's fine. Yeah.
She said, okay. And then I also wrote on her forum the same thing. This is a good forum.
And this was October, just to be on record, this was October of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And what ended up happening was she, ironically enough, reached out to you, but you were very busy, as you had informed her. And yet she never reached out to me, being that I was the first person that she reached out to begin with, to even have this sort of correspondence where she reached out to me. I reached out to you. I gave you her number, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And that's how you guys ended up having your correspondence over the phone. And yet, when she saw that you didn't respond immediately, it's ironic that she didn't message me, because had she messaged me, I would have ensured that the message would have gotten to you, number one. And number two, the conversation more than likely would have happened, right? At some point it would have happened. We would have set a date. Something would have been done where we could have had that correspondence via audio. But it's interesting, though, that even prior to that, you had said, well, let's have a correspondence via text. Whenever I get a chance, you know, it's easier for me. It's much easier to do it via text than it is through audio, you know, where you have to kind of set some time aside
and reconcile everybody's schedule. That's the other part.
And go somewhere where you have to talk in a quiet place, because obviously you're going to be doing this more than likely at work, or you know, sometime in, you know, during
or
one
at
of your
home
breaks,
where I have small children.
Where you have small children, right? So the interesting part was she agreed to it initially. She was like, okay, that's cool, like as an essentially as an alternative, or at the very least as a as a alternative, while we figured out how we were going to have some sort of audio correspondence. But needless to say, none of it materialized, and then the conspiracies came out, right?
Well, so what happened, if I may, what happened is then she did allow me to write on her forum. So I did start laying out arguments, and I was very clear that I said, you know, Kelly Richardson or anyone else can.
And this was many months later. This is just to be on record.
Yeah.
But
so I
needless
found
to say,
some time to start getting into her forum, and
but hold on a second. But just to be on record, this was many months later. But however, Abu had already told her that it wasn't going to be something that happened instantaneously right away. It was something that might take him some time, and it ended up happening somewhere in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. Correct? So this was
this is the following March. This is the following March. So I started writing on, because what happened was when the lockdowns happened in March, that suddenly freed up my time because I was no longer commuting in to Manhattan where I work. So suddenly, I have, as you know, I have a very long commute. So suddenly I had significantly more time during the lockdowns. So that's when I tried to reinitiate these conversations. And
which
so
makes sense during the lockdowns, because obviously this, and when you initiated the conversation, initially she let you correspond. It seemed that Kelly Richardson saw the post, and
well, that's what I wanted to say, just to make it clear. She was fine with it. I even said, you know, maybe we could have the discussion here in your forum. And she said, yeah, that's fine. And she allowed my post to stay up. My post went up, and I invited Kelly Richardson and anyone else interested to discuss the Pews, and then in a separate thread to discuss Lashawn Qadash. And interestingly enough, in her forum, you can see who has seen your post. Like if you put a post in her forum, there's a little thing at the bottom that says seen by, and maybe it'll say a number of people, seen by 5 people, seen by 12 people. And when you click on that, it gives a list of everybody who's looked at the post.
Right.
So because I was interested in dialoguing in particular with Kelly Richardson, I kept checking to see if his name was coming up in the list, right? So my posts were up in her forum. I got her permission in advance. You know, she was fine with it. She agreed that we could have dialogue on her forum. And what had happened was I kept checking. After about 3 days, suddenly my posts had the little detail that said Kelly Richardson had seen them. Within hours of Kelly Richardson seeing those posts, some of my posts were deleted. I was kicked out of the forum, and then shortly thereafter, the forum was set to private. So I'm confident that he's the one who convinced her to change her mind, to shut down dialogue. And then they created this new narrative of, the window has closed. It's too late. You know, like you were supposed to figure this out in October. So because we couldn't orchestrate a live discussion in October, therefore there can never be dialogue again. That was the move that basically Kelly Richardson manipulated her into taking.
Right. By the way, let me go ahead and show this. So this is from the video. Hebrews like Kelly Richardson corrected Matthew 27:46. I believe you showed it in that video, the relevant correspondence. So let me actually just show this to be on record. Just give me a moment, and then with this we'll probably end it. So this was the relevant correspondence right here. And actually, let me do something real quick before I forget. Close this other window. All right. This was the relevant correspondence here. I just mute for a second if you could. All right. So so the relevant correspondence is here, where you says, so my posts are not intended to rush anyone. Rather, I figure, Well, actually, let me go back so I can actually show a little bit. I certainly can appreciate if folks are busy. That's why I think this forum might be a good place for a discussion, as we don't have to be on at the same time. Rather, one side can post their comments or questions. Another side can respond when their schedule permits them to do so, even if the wait between replies is days or weeks. So my posts are not intended to rush anyone. Rather, I figured in the coming as time permits, I'd post some of my thoughts, and anyone who wishes to respond can do so when their schedule permits. And keep in mind, this was in the Sister E forum, correct? Correct? This was in the Sister E forum, right?
Yes, correct. It was in her forum.
And what you ended up saying was that, and then this is what Sister E's response was. Thanks, no problem. I will keep you posted of availability. I know that Vocab reached out to Kelly, and he mentioned it to me. Thanks, right? That was on March,
Yeah.
and then
that's her basically saying that yes, it's fine. We can have this discussion in this forum. And the thing was, my post was in response to her saying that everybody's busy now, and which I understood as that's fine.
Right.
We're busy at different times.
And she allowed it, and she allowed it for several days. Let me just show this to be on record. And then within hours of Richardson seeing the post, it was deleted, and I was kicked out of the forum. That's so it's on record.
Exactly.
All right. So let me just go ahead and do this real quick. So just to be on record about that. That shows the deceptive nature of that side, I believe. But
Kelly Richardson in particular, I do. One thing that Berean said is that he sees Sista E as being manipulated by Kelly, and I must confess I'm sympathetic to that view, because I've found that she's receptive at one point, and then when Kelly gets upset, it sort of makes her less receptive. So I think because she's somewhat under his influence, she makes moves that she wouldn't make if she wasn't under his influence. That's my understanding of it. So yeah, but I think the culpability falls more with him than with her.
Right. Well, with that being said, I think that's pretty much it. I certainly thank you for coming on through. I'm glad that you were able to share your thoughts and to clear things up for those who may be confused about a lot of this stuff, especially from the Hebrew Israelite side, because there seem to be a lot of people who run with the false narrative that Kelly Richardson and Will Brown seem to be pushing when it comes to these topics. But I certainly appreciate you for coming on through. Hopefully we can do this again in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And with that being said, I just want to tell the audience, I certainly appreciate you guys for for joining this discussion. Those of you who watched it early in the morning, hopefully others will see this later on throughout the day. And the video that Abu did on the old vocalization will more than likely be up this Sunday. So anyone who wants to check it out then. Abu, I want to thank you. And
if I'm not mistaken, there's also going to be a video on the case for Ge'ez on the Pews. Is that correct? Or am I mistaken about that?
Yes, that will be included as well. Yes,
okay,
that will
excellent.
be there.
Looking forward to that.
All right. So with that being said, I just want to say to the audience, thank you for those of you who watched this. God bless you all. I hope this has edified someone. And until next time, take care. God bless.
God bless.